Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode we'll once again be sailing out in the Tier 5 Soviet cruiser known as the Kirov, this time in a Tier 5 domination game on the map Archipelago. The focus of this video is the second half of a 2-video analysis series in which we're taking a look at how the recent buff to the Kirov's fire rate as of update 0.6.13 has affected the overall game style of this ship, whereby the buff was a 10% fire rate improvement, dropping the reload on its 180mm cannon batteries from 15 seconds to 13.5. In terms of how we're going to play this game, we're going to make our way towards Alpha, as whilst the majority of our team have indicated they want to go Bravo Charlie, we feel that the Kirov, what with its rather reputational nature of being the most powerful Tier 5 cruiser compared to its counterparts, including the Furitaka which my colleague Z is playing alongside me today, it seems to have that reputation of being able to dominate Tier 5 matches, and we want to see whether that stands up and has been improved. So taking the ship into a position with unfavourable odds would be a good way to do so. Now note, we're not going to go in blind and we're not just going to recklessly charge in towards Alpha, we are going to take the indirect route of making our way around the landmass in front of us off to the right hand side of it, so going down the one line on the minimap in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. As we do so, we can build up intelligence of what is potentially going on around the map. Now one thing I've already noted is the fact that two of the enemy's destroyers are squadded up with cruisers. One, the Izokaze, is squadded up with the Tier 4 Japanese cruiser, the Kuma, and the other one, the V170, is squadded up with the French H1, another Tier 4 cruiser. Depending on which cruiser I see close to Objective Alpha, assuming that the enemy team has gone that way or sent some resources that way, will typically indicate to me what destroyer has gone that way. The logic being that normally if you're playing as a platoon of a destroyer and cruiser, you will mutually support each other rather than go separate directions. So as we make our way around, we can see that the enemy team started to capture Bravos. We know there's one destroyer there. They haven't got anyone in Charlie yet and they haven't got anyone in Alpha yet. But we're about to head into Charlie with our own V170. And around the same time of our V170 getting to Charlie, Alpha starts being taken. And I'm starting to think potentially that's the enemy V170 there, because of the relative speeds of our V170 and what their V170 would be doing to get to respective objectives. But that's a bit of a far-fetched logic, and we will have it confirmed to us most likely, we'll say 90% confidence that the V170 would be at Alpha when very shortly their H1 is spotted just off of the objective. Now we started to make our way in, but waiting for the intelligence to appear, because we'd expect that shortly the cruiser would be spotted, and there we go. Now immediately, knowing the V170 is there and it's got rather good concealment, we are going to pull away from Alpha, angle away from it. Firstly, so we do not fall victim to the armour piercing of that enemy cruiser and whatever else is supporting it. And secondly, so that way we've got ample distance to dodge by being completely out of the range of incoming torpedoes. We of course can assume the worst case scenario that actually the enemy's Izokaze has gone to Alpha, but we've now seen it on the minimap up towards Charlie, so we don't have to worry about it. And sure enough, there's the V170 as predicted. Now having pulled considerable distance, we're getting ready to completely angle off from the enemy's Emerald and the H1 when they come in. And we've also acted our Hydro, which is enabling us to spot torpedoes out to a distance of 2.67 kilometers, which is okay. It means it gives us some time to dodge the torpedoes, but what with the Kirov being a very clumsy ship in terms of handling, what with 7.8 second rudder shift and 860 meters turn circle radius, we really have to keep our wits about us, so to speak. So dumping in a couple of salvos now towards the H1, we bounced a couple of shells there, well one shell and one over penetrated. This next salvo however will start to up the ante, with our ability to citadel for 4100 HP of health per citadel shell. We score one and take off a considerable chunk of their HP. But due to their overall lack of armour and our armour piercing being very powerful, funnily enough we're actually going to start achieving a lot of over penetrations rather than any actual penetration or citadel damage, as shown there with 5 over penetrations and a single penetration. And Z has fallen victim to the same thing, which is why now we were expecting that he would tear the enemy cruiser to pieces, but the reverse has happened, because all of his shells have been over penetrating to a degree of frustration. We're still learning. So in the meantime we're also angling away from the incoming torpedo bombers, and for reference the Kirov does have a rather nice AA suite, where its ability to extend out to a maximum range of 5 km with 42 damage per second, and an additional 51 damage per second comes in at 3.2 km. And by turning away from the torpedo bombers we increase the time they have to travel before they can drop their load, which means we're likely to shoot down more than just one bomber before they're able to actually drop. We can see that the V-170 is also making its way towards us, and we're now starting to turn around to turn into the torpedo bombers and simultaneously turn towards the V-170 to tackle them head on. Because of a massive profile such as our ship, we do not want to expose our broadside to a destroyer, because otherwise we're very likely to take more than one torpedo. Instead, we're going to turn directly towards them, point the bow towards them, so we can either soak up another torpedo on the bow, which will do much less damage now that we've received damage saturation to the bow, thanks to the bombers from earlier. Alternatively, we can dodge the torpedoes outright for exposing the finished profile of our ship effectively, as we pretty much leave the V-170 on death's door with a 6,000 damage high explosive salvo. Closing in the distance, we can see some torpedoes coming in. We haven't got hydroacoustic, but it's worth pointing out as well we do have the Vigilance Captain skill, the tier 3 one, to spot torpedoes 25% further away. And we dodge the incoming broadside torpedoes from the V-170, remembering it has torpedoes that can be fired forward and those that can be fired off the side. Now with the initial cruiser and destroyer taken out, we can focus on the Emerald. Again, noting that it has reasonable range torpedoes, 7 kilometers if I remember correctly, so we're going to hold off the distance, we're not going to rush in, picking up a very nice broadside salvo, and the fact they expose so much broadside gives us an indication they're probably lobbing torpedoes this way, which is why we're turning in for a brief bit and then we'll turn out once again. The logic being turn in for a bit, confuse where we're going, and then turn out once again to dodge the incoming torpedoes. They'll either have gone really wide to our port side, alternatively they would have been on the path when we turned in towards the Emerald. They could of course have tried to predict what we were going to do, but we're confident as we see the torpedoes whiz past us well off to our port side. We do take a considerable amount of damage from the enemy dive bombers, but we can see we are bringing those aircraft down from the enemy Langley, and they're low tier dive bombers as well, only tier 3 ones, which means, if I remember correctly, they haven't got the upgraded bombers, so our AA can make short work of them. We'll now have the space and time to take objective Alpha. And what can we say so far about the damage per minute buff of this ship, either the fire rate buff? Well, it hasn't exactly allowed us to do anything new. We've had to angle, we've had to try and deflect damage away from our ship or dodge incoming damage where possible. We've had to keep our distance to avoid succumbing to torpedo spreads, alternatively just sheer firepower from a number of enemy ships. So really all we've been able to do so far is practice our normal methods, but do so with increased damage output, or expected damage output, as we bring down some more bombers here and we dodge the incoming torpedoes. So it's really just a improvement to the quality of life of this ship, rather than a case of changing the game plan completely or allowing you to be a bit more assured in your playstyle, alternatively develop a sense of arrogance as I can take on anything when I'm the top tier ship. And we're going to see this further and further as we go into this game now. What if our logic being that the enemy October Revolution is actually pushing Objective Bravo and our team seem to be very far in the back of where we spawned. So as a result, I'm aware of the fact that the ship does not have that much armour. Again, it's only got 50mm of Citadel armour belt all along the broadside, and that extends from the lead turret to the rearmost turret, meaning that even angled, that October Revolution is going to have a field day firing armour piercing at us. So instead we need to use our strengths to our advantage, which is that we have the long range of 16.3 kilometers, we have the Admiral Dispersion, which we will use here to reset the Izakazi, if that's why you're wondering why we've held our fire. We know what's taking the objective here, it's not the battleship, it's the enemy destroyer, so we'll get the resets to delay their progress. We can use the range to 135 meters dispersion, and our speed in order to keep the centre and the upper echelons of the map within range, and in the meantime we can go in pursuit of the enemy carrier because we have the firepower and indeed the improved fire rate to bring them down rather rapidly. And this carrier seems to have made a point of focusing us for a good chunk of the game, so it's only polite that we return the favour for a little bit. And also once the carrier is out of the game, it means that our carrier can practice their methods without interruption, apart from the AA on enemy ships. As in our initial salvo, we hit with 8 out of 9 shells and score a fire, and we'll see that the 13% fire chance and the maximal high explosive damage of 2,500 is nothing to laugh at. Dropping in our second salvo, a second fire, and that Langley is going to pretty much burn to death alongside our high explosive shells. Now the consideration we have to make here, we keep an eye on the priority target indicator. We've been targeted by one enemy ship very briefly, so it's probably a quick throw salvo from the October Revolution. They target us again. Note how we're angled away from them on the mini-map. We've taken this into account in our pursuit of the Langley. We're not just going in blind. And we do take a very limited hit, which knocks out our steering. But, considering the fact we were not steering the ship at the time to pursue the Langley or re-angle our ship, it means we don't have to worry about repairing it. the Langleys are well within range of our guns, and we're staying on a straight line away from the October Revolution with a small bit of angling, so we're in the most ideal situation for dodging incoming fire and bringing down the carrier threat. Having taken them out and picked up an arsonist, we'll now turn back in. But you can see just how the October Revolution, and indeed the majority of Objective Bravo, has remained within our range throughout this entire pursuit. It's not as though we've drifted out of the engagement. And whilst I do personally agree with a number of people who say you should never ever charge blindly into the enemy spawn or the enemy's base in even a domination game, I personally feel that the rewards of that was much greater than the potential risk and the implication over the course of the rest of the match. And with our 35.5 knot stop speed, we can now close the distance once again to the objectives. Now the issue we have to consider here is the fact that there are 4 enemy battleships remaining and 1 destroyer. Now we can't afford to just charge into these battleships, but what we can do is use our new fire rate improvement in order to be able to set more fires, and therefore gradually build up our damage output, exhaust the consumables of the enemy battleships, i.e. their repairs and their damage controls, and therefore just bleed the health out of them faster. Again, a rate of 10% improvement. So it's very nice here how we can just sit back, use our range, and bring in this new fire rate strength. Looking towards the enemy Miyogi now, hopefully we'll set a fire on them instead. We couldn't quite get a clear shot on the enemy Orion, as they're behind the landmass, although we could have tried peeking over it. And we set a fire on the Miyogi. Now what we can assume is, if they decide to put the fire out at this point, there'll be say a 5 or 10 second window in which they're putting the fire out, and then we can set another fire on them. So in the meantime, that's why we're switching between the 2 targets to try and set fires on both of them. But it looks as though the Miyogi is letting the fire burn. We're now closing the distance a little bit because based on the way the Orion was going previously, they were moving towards Bravo. If we get a little bit closer at this point, just move up towards the 9 line, preferably grid square G9, we may be able to get into a position where we can catch them on the broadside and bring our armour piercing to bear, which is good at not only citadel and enemy cruisers, but also causing mayhem to broadsides of enemy battleships. And again, we can do it 10% faster in bringing out the damage because of the fire rate improvement. Also continuously focusing our guns towards the Izokazi where possible, because when that destroyer's gone, that means the spotting capability of the enemy team is all but gone. Now the Orion comes in on time and exposes a good chunk of broadside to us, which means we can bring the armour piercing to bear. Getting ready to fire, and we'll throw in the first salvo. Now in the meantime, if you're wondering, why am I exposing so much broadside in return? Well, I can see that the Orion's guns are pointing the opposite way to my ship, and they seem to be very focused on engaging our Miyogi on the other side of Bravo relative to them. The enemy Miyogi would have to throw shells over a landmass into our angled bow, so they're not going to be able to drop armour piercing successfully onto us, and the enemy Congo is an extreme distance away and probably doesn't even consider us a threat right now. Hence the logic. And sure enough, there goes the enemy Orion, and that is our Kraken. But it's not over yet. We now need to go after the Miyogi, and we'll pursue at this point because they seem to be pulling back. We can see that the enemy Izokazi has now gone to smoke in Bravo, so we've got a strong feeling that they're not going to be coming this way anytime soon, because they're using the smoke in order to conceal themselves and potentially torpedo our battleships making their way towards Bravo. We of course have the objective disadvantage here, so we're coming up behind the enemy battleship, the Miyogi, in order to provide a 2-pronged attack for our team, set them on fire and picking up our Confederate award. We're angled towards them as they send in some armour piercing, also using the idea of changing up our speed in terms of whether at full power or half power to throw off their shots. Their shots falling just in front of our bow there. We have turned on Hydro just in case the Izokazi has made a speedy rush towards us and wants to torpedo us around the landmass off to our port side, so we are considering all potential outcomes. As we set another fire on the Miyogi, and at this point they'd either burn to death or our friendly battleships can get the kill. Making our way forward, we're being a little bit cautious at first, but the fact that we are not being seen at this point does indicate to us one key thing here. The fact that the Izokazi is either in their smoke, or alternatively they're on the opposite side of it going north of Bravo, rather than northeast of the objective. The Izokazi now being spotted confirms our suspicions, and it means that the only threat left on the enemy team is nowhere by means focused on us, they're focused elsewhere. And we can bring the shells at once again, incapacitating a module on their ship, we're not sure what. And really now it's just a case of getting into an ideal firing position to bring them down. We're being cautious, we're taking our time about this, all the advantages are now conferred to our team, bar the number of objectives we have. We unfortunately lose our Miyogi, but now we wait for the Izokazi. They'll either do one or two things. They're either going to go back into Bravo, or they'll turn to go towards Charlie, and we're ready to fire either way, and wrap up this game, as we're now going to see. And with that, let's take a look. At the post-game stats. A rather comfortable victory in the end. We can see that our battle performance amounted to 101,991 HP of damage dealt, whereby we also picked up 3 achievements as part of this. A standard achievement in the form of the Arsonist, whereby we're able to set fire to and destroy an enemy ship, the enemy Langley in particular, whereby the fire consumed over 40% of the ship's normal health pool. We also picked up the 2 heroic achievements of Confederate, whereby we damaged at least 6 enemy ships, the damage caused to each of these ships exceeding 20% of their normal health pool, and the one that everybody likes to get, the Kraken Unleashed, for destroying 5 or more enemy ships in a single battle. Looking at the team scores, we can see we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 2,348. Ironically, whilst many would consider this to be a solo carry, I'm actually very grateful for how my team operated here, and I will be the first to admit that I was selfish in this game, operating alone on Objective Alpha, alongside my good friend Z. But as the game went on and we managed to dispatch the foes at Alpha, note how our teammates kept the enemy fleet engaged up at Bravo and Charlie, meaning that the enemy team were not aware of what was coming around behind them from Objective Alpha, i.e. our own cruiser, whereby we could use the space created by our teammates in order to take out the enemy's carrier first and foremost, and then come up behind their remaining battleships, helping to secure the victory. Looking at our detailed report, we have one key item to note here, and that is the split of our main battery damage, the 78,054 being divided almost equally between high explosive and armour piercing. And ironically enough, we pretty much used the same number of shells to deal that damage, i.e. 65 and 62 hits respectively with the 2 shell types. I personally feel this goes to show one of the key points that I'd like to hammer out, that is that using the right shell at the right point in time can enable you to do the maximal amount of damage. We saw here how we used our high explosive and armour piercing equally in turn in order to bring up our damage total, if you do not also include the fire damage we did as a result of high explosive hits. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away 428,944 silver credits and 3,522 commander experience. To conclude, I personally feel that even when the Kirov is a top tier ship in a given match, it is not able to access additional strategic avenues of play thanks to the fire rate buff. If anything, the fire rate buff has reinforced and encouraged the more conservative and tactical play that the Kirov embodies. The idea of having a lot of firepower to bear but a lack of armour to support it means that you need to play distant and angle smart, that way deflecting away or minimising the damage you'll receive from cruisers and enemy battleships, and in return being able to deal out significant damage when your foes expose their broadsides, especially to your armour piercing, alternatively setting fires with your high explosive, but at a 10% faster rate thanks to the 10% buff to the firepower. If you're able to acknowledge this and use it to your advantage, then as a result you'll be able to assert 180mm dominance over your foes. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.